In this video, I'll be offering you my thoughts on the first Pro Series lens from Meike for the Fujifilm X system, the 85mm f1.8. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll be offering you my take on Meike's new 85mm f1.8 Pro lens for the Fujifilm X mount. Now, this is a full-frame lens design that's been ported over to the Fujifilm X mount, and we'll get into what that means for us a little bit later in the review, but for now, it's a relatively lightweight, fast aperture autofocus lens with a price tag that won't break the bank. Now, on a full-frame sensor, this is the classic portrait focal length with the introductory maximum aperture of f1.8, and on those systems, it fills the role of the XF56mm f1.2 on APS-C. But because of the smaller sensor on the Fujifilm X cameras, this lens is actually effectively a much longer telephoto. Now, its closest competitor from Fujifilm is the 90mm f2, so I'll make a few comparisons to that throughout the review. Of course, before we get started, as always, the usual disclaimer applies. Meike did send this lens over for review, and I do get to keep it. They didn't ask for anything other than an honest video on this channel, and no money has changed hands. What you see here is the result of my time with the lens, and Meike will be watching this video for the first time here with you as it goes live. In my conversation with Meike, I asked them to define the difference between their Pro and Neo series lenses, because honestly, the Neo series lenses that I've used, like the 33mm and the 55mm, have been absolutely great. Now, I was told that Pro, in Meike speak, means that the lens now uses low dispersion glass, has no chromatic aberration, no breathing, and will resolve enough fine detail for 8K video. Now, I'm not a video shooter, and I'm not going to do any line tests to confirm their resolution claims, but we will talk about the overall image quality from a still standpoint. And of course, most of the images in this video have been photographed on Fujifilm's 40 megapixel sensor, so you'll be able to see how much detail is rendered by this lens. Now, I'm also going to discuss the use of the Pro moniker here, and whether or not I think it's appropriate for a lens like this. As with all the Meike lenses I've tested so far, build quality here is fantastic. It feels premium and punches well above its price point. Now, the composite materials feel really good in the hand, and the aperture and focus rings both feel excellent. Now, if I had one little gripe about those, it would be that the aperture ring is just a little bit too easy to turn at times, and I found myself knocking it by accident quite frequently. Now, with just a little more resistance on that, it wouldn't come out of my bag at a different aperture value each time, and would receive a strong thumbs up from me. As it stands, it's a little bit lackluster compared to the rest of the build. Meike also includes this nice big hood with the lens that does a great job of shading the front element and protecting it from knocks. Now, it clicks into place a lot more firmly than a lot of lenses from other manufacturers that I've tested, which I've just ended up leaving those hoods at home anyway because they fall off or they're just ineffective. Now, Meike does a really good job with these, and this one is no exception. So, finally, it would have been great if Meike could have applied weather sealing on all points of ingress on this lens rather than just at the mount. This would really help to sell that Pro moniker that it takes on. To me, the word Pro denotes that it can hold up to the rigors of use in any situation. And in modern lens design, that means the inclusion of weather-resistant seals. Now, it's a real disappointment not to see those. All in all though, especially considering the price point, it's really hard to complain about Meike's build quality aside from those small points. Autofocus on this lens is driven by Meike's stepping motor, which does a great job of getting the lens where it needs to be quickly, quietly, and confidently. Now, it's really hard to fault the autofocus on this lens. It works wonderfully in AFS and tracks without issue in AFC. Also, the fact that it has no breathing to speak of means that you don't get those sort of jelly wobbles in the corner of the frame as the lens quickly sweeps through its focus range either. To give you an idea of just how quickly this lens snaps into focus, here I was using AFS, not even tracking, to focus on and photograph these azaleas blowing in the winds that were gusting at about 50 or 60 kilometers an hour that day. The lens did not miss a single frame. It locked on and grabbed a photograph every single time I pressed the shutter button. As a quick test of tracking, I photographed a few people walking at different speeds and even got my wife barreling towards me at around 30 kilometers an hour on her bicycle, and again, it did not miss a beat. On the X-T5 and X-T50, it kept up and got frame after frame in perfect focus. I've got absolutely no complaints about the autofocus on this lens. It does a stellar job. This lens was designed from the ground up to provide coverage of a full-frame sensor, which means that on APS-C, we're only using the central area of that image circle, and that should be the best performing section, so we should expect really great results from this one. Sharpness in the center of the frame is excellent wide open, and in fact to my eye, I would say it's marginally sharper than Fujifilm's X f90mm f2, and as the lenses stop down, it gets sharper, but really not by much, and there's no real good reason to stop down, except for depth of field if center sharpness is what you're looking for. It's excellent, and it only gets better. The corners are also excellent, as we'd expect, since we're only using the central portion of the image circle. They're still slightly softer than the center though, and they only reach their peak by around f4. By that point, they're absolutely as good as the center of the frame. Again, there's very little reason to stop this lens down too far. The corners are already great wide open, and I wouldn't hesitate to make use of them. In extreme situations, we do see a little chromatic aberration around the out of focus edges of high contrast objects, but it's not awful, and I haven't felt the need to be cautious of it in my photography because, well, it's really not that strong, and it's not distracting in my opinion. As with the sharpness, since we're only using the center of the image circle, there should be very little vignette present, and that's absolutely the case here. Wide open, there's a hint of a vignette in the far corners, but it's already gone by f2, and it stays gone after that. Often with fast lenses, we'll see some coma and astigmatism, but I haven't seen even a hint of either in my testing so far. That's really great news for when you want to work with small light sources in the frame. Okay, so onto the bokeh. Let's start with the good here. Most of the time, bokeh in images from this lens looks great, and it does an excellent job of keeping your eyes locked onto the in-focus areas of the image and not drawing them away to the out-of-focus areas, which is what we really want in the end. As you can see, it delivers a beautifully smooth rendering with a little bit of an old-school feeling to it. There's some texture, but not jitteriness in certain scenes, and I really like the look of it in most scenes that I've photographed. However, if you do look closely at this scene, you'll start to see a bit of an issue that I've found with it. Then, if we switch to a night scene and make things a little bit easier to see, it's instantly noticeable. There's quite a bit of an onion ring pattern forming in the specular highlights. For comparison's sake, here are the bokeh balls from Fujifilm's X f90mm f2. In and of itself, this isn't really an issue unless giant bokeh balls are the main element of your images, but you might notice it in certain daylight scenes like the previous one as well. The other thing that you may have noticed is, since we're using the central area of the image circle, we do miss out on the edges of the frame where the cat's eye bokeh and thus a little bit of that swirl in the bokeh is likely to form, so that isn't really something that we can do with this lens on APS-C sensors. Finally, I'd like to do a quick close-up comparison with Fujifilm's X f90mm. Now, to my eye, in a regular scene like this, the 90mm is a touch smoother, but I'd really be splitting hairs to tell you if I preferred one over the other. The 85mm does a great job at rendering bokeh that just gets out of the way and allows you to focus on the subject. Sunstars are somewhat possible with this lens, but they're really nothing special. They're often quite small and lack really sharp definition. Now, somewhere between this effect and some of those perfectly sharp sunstars that we see from Laowa's lenses is where I like to see my sunstars, so personally with this lens, I wouldn't really go looking for them. It took a few outings with this lens to see any flare and ghosting at all. In fact, it took a storm here to clear the pollution out of the skies so that we had strong enough light for me to overcome the coatings of this lens. Flare is not too much of an issue here, and it's mostly very, very well controlled. I did notice it a couple of times when I had the sun just outside the edge of the frame, and that would cause a bit of a loss of contrast, but it was really hard to find that exact angle, and putting on the hood or slightly changing your angle does get rid of it. Now, some ghosting is present and it's much easier to find than the flare. Still, I could only mostly make a small discolored spot appear, and it was extremely easy to send it out of the frame with a slight angle change or place it in an area of the image where it could easily be removed in post-production. Overall, flare and ghosting are fairly well controlled, and when they do occur, they're quite easy to remove or not particularly obnoxious and easy enough to use creatively in my opinion. The one issue that I have with Fujifilm's X f90mm f2 is just how bulky and heavy it is when it's added to a kit of other lenses. It spends quite a bit of time in my dry cabinet just because of that. The Meike 85mm f1.8, which for my uses is exactly the same lens, is smaller and lighter than the Fujifilm lens, and that means I take it with me more often. Now, a lens that you're willing to take out of the house is infinitely more useful than one that you're not willing to take out of the house in my books. So this 85mm, after my initial shot of the metal, my walk around, and my quick brick wall tests to confirm my hunches about it, has found its way into my bag on so many more occasions when I would have just left the 90mm at home. The image quality is fantastic, and it's on a level where I've taken it on couple shoots, family shoots, and corporate events without a second thought. It delivers the quality that I want from my lenses when working with my clients. On couple shoots, it's allowed me to simplify scenes and crop out even more distracting elements than I would with the lens that I use most often, the 56mm f1.2. For example here, there was a tree line just above the couple and basically nothing in the foreground, so stepping back a little and using this longer lens has allowed me to just crop in and make sure that I don't have any of those distracting elements in the frame. When it comes to family sessions, young children will often be a little worried about a new person at the beginning of a session, and this lens has allowed me to just get a little further away and allow them time to get comfortable with me before I switch to my 23mm and start getting all up in their faces. Now, its autofocus in situations like this has given me the confidence that it will just sort of get there quickly as I move my face away from the camera, interact with my clients, and then jump back in for a quick shot. Now, this is something that I really can't expect from my XF 56mm. So as you can probably see, the strengths of this lens lie in its ability to isolate subjects and do so quickly and reliably. Now, with the tight field of view and the extremely shallow depth of field possible with this lens, picking out something and just isolating it from everything else around it is almost too easy. One of the other benefits of Meike's Pro designation is the lack of breathing in the lens. Now, videographers will hear this and it will likely be music to their ears, but even in stills photography, with a prime lens this long, it's great not to have to constantly be stepping back and forth to compensate for the changes in framing as you focus the lens. It stays the same and you don't have to worry about it. A potential downside to this lens is its minimum focus distance. Now, it's a little bit longer than the XF 90mm, which focuses close enough to make it really useful for, detail shots of small objects at corporate events, for example. Now, this is actually quite a significant difference when you put the two side by side, and I have run into the minimum focus distance of the 85mm quite a few times and wished it could get just a little bit closer. As I said with Meike's 55mm f1.4, this is the closest thing I've seen from a third-party manufacturer to the feeling of the images from Fujifilm's own lenses, making it easy to work with when you're sort of mixing and matching with XF lenses. So here's the short and sweet of it. I'm actually considering selling my Fujifilm XF 90mm f2. This lens produces great detail and in my experience actually has better autofocus than the 90mm, and it gets a lot more use because of its size and weight. Now, the long version of that. Meike has done a great job of producing a high quality lens, both in terms of build and optics. The aperture ring is a little loose for my liking, and I don't really feel like the lens should have the word Pro attached to it without being weather sealed in this day and age. But if you were to take the word Pro out of the naming convention, I wouldn't expect these things, and at this price point I feel like this is a really excellent offering. Optically, I can fault the bokeh a little bit for its onion ring pattern, and perhaps the flare and ghosting aren't as pleasant as the XF 90mm, but those are really the only trade-offs for a lens that's around a third of the price, which in my opinion is quite impressive. So if you're looking for a longer prime lens with a fast aperture, this one would definitely be high on my list of recommendations for you to consider. For anyone who's not relying on this focal length to pay their bills day in, day out in any sort of weather, there's really no reason to look anywhere else in my opinion. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this review and got what you came for here, but if you do have any questions about the lens, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.